So it is time to take a look at the Lucent-Moon. That is the new Yan-Jung carrier that's been released, I think, last week. Now overall, this does look like a very interesting ship, probably the most unique capital ship that we have in the game at the moment. Unfortunately, it cannot fit in the hangar. I mean, it can fit, but you can't really see the whole thing. But this is definitely a very odd looking ship, and I'm kind of a fan of this design. It does look kind of majestic when you undock and when you can actually see the whole thing, but this is how it looks in the hangar. Kind of funny, but yeah. Overall, today I'll be testing out the performance of this ship, and I will of course show you a lot of different builds. Now, yeah, this is how this thing looks. It looks much better when I undock it, because over here the picture is kind of low resolution for some reason. But yeah, that's the Lucent-Moon. Now the roll bonus, it can fit command bursts, 200% bonus to command burst effective range, 100% turret damage, 100% missile torpedo damage, can operate super heavy logistic drones, it can use sun trace navigation systems, plus 50% shield and armor plate hit bonus, which is very interesting. Now, when it comes to the skill per level bonuses, you do get a plus 100% drone shield boost amount, 75% drone flight velocity, and plus 20km drone command range. And of course, you have the advanced force auxiliary command bonus, which will give you about 20%, 25% total shield resistance. And of course, you have the other remote shield booster stats. This is kind of a hybrid between a force auxiliary and a carrier, and they also added a faction carrier or the versatile solo chip mix into the whole thing. The other stats look decent, should offer a very unique ship when it comes to the overall performance. It can be a combat ship and it can be a logistic ship at the same time, which is kind of interesting. And also, this ship received 2 extra rig slots and some new modules. Now, onto the build. So, how am I going to be fitting this thing? Well, that's kind of a good question, because you have 3 different building ideas for the Lucent-Moon. You can use it with fighters, you can use it with lightweight ships, you can use it with drones, and you can use it as a logistic ship. But technically 4 things. But this is the classic usual build that I start with, a chunky tank build. The capacity of this ship isn't that bad, and Yan-Jung ships are primarily shield tanks, shield or hull tanks. Ironically, we don't have a hull tank, but these ships usually have very strong shields and hulls, while their armors aren't usually that good. Now, as you can see, this ship has 2 special rig slots, Yan-Jung capital ship system refactoring, in this case the shield and the armor one. Here you can take a look at the stats. Overall, a very nice little addition, and this is unique only to this ship, specifically designed for Yan-Jung capital ships, which is interesting. And I'll be using the shield one, since again the ships are meant to be used as shield tanks, and it also almost has like a million shield hit points, which is nice. It can definitely be a lot more than what I show here. And as for the special hangar modifications, so now this is something that we have seen on the versatile assault ships, on the faction carriers, and this is something that's been unique to these ships so far. Now, you cannot fit the classic hangar modification systems on the Lucent-Moon, and I'll show what happens if you try to install them. Now, of course, you have to remove all your modules, drones and stuff from the ship when you are fitting these modules. So yeah, you cannot fit any of these modules on the ship while I have stuff equipped. And I'm just showing you that if you do have the ship and if it doesn't work, you have to remove the modules in order to fit the hangar modification. So let me quickly strip the ship naked. Not in that context, but strip the modules naked, of course. And now you still cannot fit the classic versatile assault ship hangar modifications, but you can fit the specific ones for the Lucent-Moon, or in this case, specifically for Yan-Jung capital ships. And I'll show you the DPS with lightweight ships and with fighters. Now, you can only fit destroyer lightweight ships as of now. With the lightweight ship modification, you can fit the frigates from what I've tried out. Now, honestly, if you have skills for lightweight ships, I would personally go with lightweight ships, since, from my experience, they have been performing better than the fighters when it comes to combat, especially with the implant stuff. I started to prefer lightweight ships over ordinary fighters, if you have the option, of course. But even the high slots, you can put any weapon that you like. This thing has a equal bonus to missiles and turrets. Any turret, any missile, high angle weapon, classic weapon, long range turret, long range missile, it will have the same bonus on everything, which is kind of interesting, since this carrier can fit high slot weapons. The same way how the CNC carrier can do the same thing. The CNC carrier and this ship have a lot of in common, although they're at the same time very different ships. So, let's go and equip the fighter bay. Now, when it comes to fighters, again, if you have skills for fighters, you can use fighters. In the end, if you have skills for both, pick whatever system you prefer. But it's not really limited to lightweight ships only. You can use fighters if you like fighters, of course. So with this ship you have options. You do have a lot of options when it comes to the build. And I will be using, well, I mean, you can technically use the red tail hawks, but personally I like their DPS, but I don't like the tracking of the red tail hawks. They can be kind of tricky to use, even though they are using decomposers, and decomposers are Yan-Jung weapons, so technically this ship is meant to use the red tail hawks, but I don't really like to use them because they have very poor tracking, and in all of cases the red tail hawks are much faster than what their tracking can accomplish, so you end up missing a lot of targets. Decomposers have a very specific way of operating. It has to be within optimal range. If it's not within optimal range, it will miss, and if they are too fast, they'll miss as well. So yeah, I personally would use the other fighters. If you have red tail hawks, you can use them, of course, but you have to make sure that they are able to track the target. Now, when it comes to the build variety, well, as I mentioned before, let's start with something chunky first, something tanky. Since I usually like to start with a tanky build, it's one of the things that I like to do. As for the implants, you have the aerospace, you have the bombard. Both are fantastic. I personally have a high level bombard myself. I don't have the aerospace. Bombard is just much better for the burst DPS and for PvP, while aerospace is fantastic for PvE and for longer battles. But again, you can use both implants, doesn't matter which one you have, and both will get the job done. As for the general units, again, I usually leave that up to the player. You can focus on extra tank, extra DPS, speed. You can also focus on capacity performance. That is something that is up to the purpose that you assign the ship for. In my case, PvP, that means tank or DPS. That's what I usually go for. And 16,000 DPS we have on this thing. Not bad actually, and still has some very good tank. Let's undock and let's see how this thing actually. Let's refuel this thing first. Now you do have a bonus on command bursts, which is very nice. So the command bursts will enhance your fleet performance, they will enhance the overall shield boost performance, overall shield volume, and the skirmish command can also enhance the range of web scramblers, and it also increases the speed, I believe. So overall a very useful asset for our fleet, and at the same time you do get all of these bonuses yourself. Your own ship does get these bonuses, some of them, so also very useful for solo if you fly the ship for PvE, or if you like to camp, or if you like to run around and, I guess, blow stuff up with the Lucent-Moon. And of course, let me show you how much fuel you can carry. Now, of course, this is with heavy water, but it does have a very spacey fuel hold, so we don't have to worry about being unable to refuel this thing on the move. You have a big fuel hold, and this does have a nice cargo hold as well, so you are definitely not going to be running out of the fuel on this thing. I also like the little icon there on the front hull, a little Yan-Jung icon. There's going to be more of these ships, by the way, not capitals, but all sorts of ship types. This is just like the start, kind of a test, I would say. Also a module test with the new specific modules that are for this ship. We will see that on Tech 3 cruisers in this game at one point. So let's see how much tank can this thing. And we all know Yan-Jung ships have fantastic shields. You should be building them with a shield tank. Can technically work with the other support defense rig for armor. If you are part of an armor fleet, doesn't necessarily mean you only have to use shield. In some occasions you can make the armor work, but it does require a bit more effort to actually get some fat armor on Yan-Jung ships, since they don't usually have very tough armors, but very good hulls and very good shields. Something to remember. Might be important for the future Yan-Jung ships. So let's see how this ship looks when I'm just assigning the battle layout to be more nice to look at, I guess. So let's turn everything on and let's see how much tank I can get out of this thing. 3 adaptives, a reactive, also has the damage control. Does have some good repairs. I mean, it's still a carrier, it's not going to have like dreadnought level of repairs, but you know, it is still going to get the job done for sure. 12,000 hit points, 91, 93, 94, 92%. That's pretty beefy. That's actually fairly tanky. Impressive little tank, and over 1 million shield hit points. Definitely a little chunk right here. A chunky little ship. Now, maybe there'll be more modules for the shield or for the armor or for the hull. So I'll be paying close attention to that. But these ships are definitely meant to be used with the special module, that's for sure. So that was the damage control: 62,000, 98, 99, 99, and 98. Basically immortality for about 13 seconds. Can be very useful against extreme high burst DPS, but even without damage control you still have over 90% resistance, which is still pretty amazing. And here you can take a look at the stats of the drones. Let's dock, and let me do a couple more builds for this thing. But so far I'm pretty happy with how the Lucent-Moon turned out to be. Now with this build, only one capacitor battery might not be enough for ship build. You can add more capacitor batteries if you like, of course. As for the other modules that you can fit, well, you can enhance the fighter speed and DPS. Basically you can add like the fighter micro warbreath guides, which I'm about to do, and they'll make your fighters a bit faster. It is actually recommended to use those, to use the module that I'm currently using if you are actively using the ship for PvP, since you will need them to chase down tackle ships and similar. And you can slap one fighter DPS mod, kind of a tanky build but with a bit more utility for the fighters, which is always nice to have. Should still have a pretty beefy tank. We're about to check out the tank and the DPS of this ship. So yeah, you can do something like this, and now you have some form of tank, and you do have some fighter performance, extra added fighter performance, extra speed, extra DPS. Again, always nice to have that. Very good. Extra speed is very good against tackle ships. Interceptors, frigates, you know, stuff like that. So, let's take a look at the stats. Now 18,000 DPS, which is okay. 9.1 million hit points, yeah, still fairly tanky. 88, 91, 92 and 87%. That's still more than enough, I would say. Still more than enough DPS. Also has some extra speed now, 4 km per second, 3.8 km per second. If you have the bombard, and if you have the bombard on a high level, you can actually use the previous build without having a micro warrior guide, because you actually get something very similar with the bombard. I think it's the level 45 attribute that gives you extra fighter speed, extra drone fighter lightweight ship speed. So yeah, technically if you have the other implants, you can use the previous build just fine without a micro warrior guide, but I recommend you to have at least some form of micro warrior guide on your ship for the fighters. Now let me quickly save this build in case I have to change things. And, well, I mean, I'll have to change build 1,000 times today, but well, that was kind of a tank slash DPS. Still has some very good DPS for a tanky ship, which is always interesting. Now, let's quickly strip the ship again, and next thing that I will be doing with the build, well, no, that was tank. Let's do lightweight ships now. Now when it comes to lightweight ships, for this ship, as I already mentioned, you will have only destroyers, which is not necessarily bad. The destroyers have the best tracking and overall best DPS, and they're very very good when it comes to PvP and PvE, and this would be a glass PvP build, full DPS, full YIT DPS build, something that you usually see on super carriers and on some normal carriers as well. In this case, you do have that special damage module specifically designed for lightweight ships. As for the implant, you can use the bombard or the aerospace tactic in this case, but a build like this does seem to be a bit more suitable for the bombard, since you will be able to get about 200 to 300,000 DPS with a right build on this ship. So it's pretty good DPS, pretty scary DPS. Well, maybe not exactly 300,000, that's already super capital territory, but basically triple the DPS that you will see here, and in the future when the ship gets nanocore, since at the moment the ship doesn't have a nanocore, which is very interesting since one of the few ships that doesn't have nanocore. But I'm fairly sure you'll be able to get some very very scary DPS. Estimate about 150,000 DPS with the right build on the Lucent-Moon. But let's take a look at what type of DPS I will get with this ship. As for the high slot modules, you can use any weapon that you like. It's up to player preference. Preferably a weapon that you have skills for, just to maximize the potential DPS from the weapon, since the skills still apply to whatever weapon you are using. Now, surprisingly, even with a glass type build, this ship still has a lot of hit points. 14,000 something ain't adding up though. Why is my DPS so low? Oh, that explains it. I forgot to add rigs. Okay, well, let me quickly fix that. But technically you should get about 20 to 23,000 DPS with 4 damage mods on this ship, which is, I would say, fairly okay. And if we triple that, well, basically if we triple that, you should get anywhere near 100,000 DPS with this current build using lightweight ships, which is not bad. Definitely is going to kill any sub-capital ship, that's for sure, since the carriers, classic carriers, are sub-capital ship killers, and in this case you will probably be wiping them out pretty quickly, since There is, I don't think that there is a solo battleship that can take this much DPS. Now one thing that you should be careful around is a armor tank fleet. If you encounter a armor tank fleet that can be dangerous, they can tank. So while you do have good DPS, there are ships out there that, well, not exactly ships, but fleets and fleet compositions that will kill you. It doesn't matter how much DPS you have. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's take a look at the stats of this thing in this current form, with this current build. 19,000 DPS. Okay, I was close. Not exactly 20,000, but pretty close. If you have offense or integrated lightweight ships, your DPS will be much higher. 5 million hit points. Still has some decent resistance. Now you can technically sacrifice a bit of DPS for a integration that will increase the overall shield resistance, and that's, I would say, the perfect combination. You would have tank and you would still have some very good DPS. So not exactly the build I would personally use for this ship. I would have one integration for integration for resistance, but both will get the job done. In this build here you have a bit more DPS, but I still prefer tank. I'm just a pilot who likes tank on my capital ships. Anyway, how would a PvE build look? Well, you have a lot of options, really. This ship can enter high sec, so you can use a classic high sec build on this thing, since you can, if you like, for whatever reason, if you want to go to high sec, you can. They will be allowed to enter high sec, not sure for how long, but you can use them in high sec as of now, as of me recording this video at the moment. And yeah, it means you don't really need a lot of tank. Minimal tank would be enough. I still prefer to have some form of tank, even if it has to be minimal. It will look something like this. Damage control, a adaptive hardener. Damage control became very important nowadays. It does really save your ship. I speak from my personal experience. Damage control saved like 20-30 of my ships, so always equip a damage control if you can, since it is a very useful module and it does indeed save your ship from certain destruction in a lot of cases nowadays. Now, since this is also a logistic, this is how a Logi build would look. Of course, I am not a Logi pilot, but I expect to see something similar to this. You can equip the super heavy shield maintenance drones, and you also have the remote shield boosters in the high slots. With a build like this, you focus on capacitor and tank. I went with a passive tank, since you want to have your capacitor saved for the friendly ships that you will be repairing. You also have to be reliant on your own team to repair your own ship in this case. As for the implant, you do have an implant for remote repair, which is this one. Very good. You can basically fill in a Dreadnought's shield in a second or two, but at the cost of your whole capacitor. You do have also general units where you can enhance your remote repairs as well. Overall, the remote repairing can be interesting. The overall mechanics are interesting. I haven't been a Logi ever in this game. I haven't been using a Logi ship for Logi purposes, but I know players, my friends, who do, and it does work really well. Let me quickly show you the active stats. It will still have very good tank. It will still have a very good tank, so it's going to be pretty easy for your team to repair your ship, and you can almost guarantee that you will be the primary target. Usually Logis and Guardians are primary targets. I actually expected the ship to be a Guardian as well. I expected that it would have a shield field module option. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I tried to fit a shield field module, it doesn't fit. So while it's a Logi and can be a combat carrier. Unfortunately, it cannot be a guardian carrier, at least not at the moment. The Revenant, for example, when they add faction super carriers, will have a shield fill module, and that's going to be a very important asset, and very important and a very tanky ship to use and to fly. And I'll be flying it to test out its performance, of course. Well, 63,000, technically 180,000 shield recovered per cycle, and that's actually not bad. But at the cost of your capacity, it will use a lot of energy. So best to combine that implant with a capacitor battery. Did you see how quickly my capacitor got yeeted? 1 or 2 cycles and goodbye capacitor, but you can easily recover full shield on a dreadnought, or not like a dreadnought, but you can even repair super capitals, can repair everything. So if you are a Logi pilot, and this is one of the ships that you may be flying for siege battles, and here you can take a look at the implant stats as well. Overall, I would say mechanics for remote repair are definitely interesting. I think armor remote repair and overall armor might be a little bit better at the moment, especially for a smaller fleet, but I think shield is still what most use for larger scale fleets, for larger combat, just because it's easier to cover everyone. But overall, nonetheless, it is quite interesting indeed. So, how is the combat performance of this thing? Honestly, after using every single carrier-based ship in the game, after flying the CN carrier, after flying the Empire carriers, and don't worry, I will be reviewing the Empire carriers again, since it's been a while since I've done a video on those ships. That's something I have to do. I didn't forget, I just, time is a thing. Time is kind of limited. But I'll be flying them again to see how they hold up. But after flying all of the ships, honestly, combat wise, while this is definitely a unique ship, it doesn't really outperform anything. If you have the CNC carrier, performance is roughly the same. Maybe the CNC can actually have, at least at the moment, more DPS, because it has a nanocore, and nanocores can significantly increase the overall damage output of your ship. This ship doesn't have a nanocore at the moment, so DPS wise it's good. Obviously it's good and it's not useless, but it doesn't have a nanocore, which is not a bad thing, I guess. The good thing is that you can choose what fighter type you will have on the ship. You can actually use the normal drones as well, which is kind of funny, but I don't know if the DPS on the normal drones would be anything decent. Haven't tested out that yet. I'll probably do it a different time. But with Bombard, I'm fairly sure you can get this thing to work even with normal drones. Can be technically a very funny bait ship if you build this thing the right way. It can be a very funny bait ship. But when it comes to overall DPS, it is about the same as the other carriers. It doesn't outperform them, it doesn't underperform, it's right within the ranks of the other carriers, including versatile assault ships and the ordinary carriers, and including the CNC carrier. So we don't have to worry about having to buy the ship just to have the best DPS. If you have a carrier, you don't have to replace it, because the overall DPS output would be about the same. The only difference is the ship allows you to use lighter ships and fighters on the same hull, which is something that we haven't seen so far. Usually a carrier can use only fighters or only lightweight ships. Example, the versatile assault ships can only use lightweight ships, while the ordinary carriers and the CNC carrier can only use fighters. And I guess one difference that this ship has compared to the other ordinary carriers is the fact that it has high slots. The other carriers, except with the exception of the CNC carrier, cannot fit anything in high slots. The only other carrier-based ship that has high slots is a super carrier, but super carriers are a different category. They are super capitals, and not exactly comparable to the ordinary smaller carriers. Now, are we going to see a Yan-Jung super carrier? Well, maybe at one point. I actually expect to see that. I do expect to see the faction super carriers being added. The next thing that can potentially be added, I don't really know, since I didn't really expect a Yan-Jung carrier. I mean, maybe a Yan-Jung super carrier will be added next, I don't know. But overall, this thing has been a pleasant surprise. Now, I know there's been like a lot of talk that this thing looks kind of funny, and I can kind of see why. It looks like when you take a Nidhogger, right, and you break it in half. You break it in half and you attach the broken half with a weird angle on the hull. Honestly, that's kind of funny when you think about it. But I do like how this thing looks. Nice aesthetics for sure. A unique looking ship. Does suit the Yan-Jung lore quite well. Now, the lightweight ship performance so far, I mean, it's been pretty good. I cannot complain about the lightweight ship performance at all, since it still has some pretty nasty DPS, and it is mowing down these ships without much of an effort, really. And I'm maybe a little spoiler, but you will see that nonetheless, since I'm adding my voice after I recorded all this. From the little test that I've done today, I've actually cleared missions faster with this ship using lightweight ships than using fighters. That's just me. I think that's just me, because I personally prefer lightweight ships over fighters. But the lightweight ships seem to have been doing a little bit more damage, or should I say they have been applying more damage. I think the big difference between the fighters and lightweight ships on this ship would be the application, since the lightweight ships, in this case the destroyers, are able to apply full damage to any ship size, including frigates, destroyers, cruisers, battleships. They're able to do maximum damage on all of them. However, the fighters, on the other hand, I noticed them struggling versus smaller targets, and I think you will see that in a moment here, since this is one laboratory where I use lightweight ships and a different laboratory where I'll be using fighters. Now, the fighter build will look a little bit different, since with fighters you can actually fit a micro warbreath guide, which will enhance the total speed of your fighters. With lightweight ships you don't have that. It's all integrated in that general fire module that I have. So the fighter build will look a little bit different from the lightweight ship build, but the total amount of DPS will generally be about the same, comparable, and the overall tank of the ship will still be about the same. But with the lightweight ships, I would say you do have one extra slot that you can put basic anything in. In my case was extra tank, so that's the difference between the two builds that you can have here. I don't have a capacitor battery. I don't think I will need one, but maybe use a capacitor battery instead of the adaptive hardener. Now, as I mentioned before, when it comes to fighters, you have a lot to choose from. I wanted to use the red-tailed hawks, but I just could not get them to work on this ship, which is kind of funny since they are using decomposers. And you would expect decomposer fighters to work on a ship that basically, should be using decomposers, but Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get good performance out of the red-tailed hawks. They were not able to hit anything on this thing, which is kind of disappointing, but that's how the composers work, unfortunately. And so if you do have them, you can try them out, but be warned, I could not get them to work properly. Their tracking is horrendous. They're just too fast for the tracking that they have, and on this carrier, the red-tailed hawks just didn't want to perform well. That's just my experience with them. If you have a different experience, then please do tell me in the comments down below. I'm curious to know what you guys have experienced if you have used the red-tailed hawks. But yeah, we'll be using the fireballs, but at the same time you can use a different combination of fighters. The fireballs have just the best DPS. They do thermal, and they do the best. They have the best like damage output, and they have the best DPS. But I personally like to mix fighters. And for the second little test, I'll be running the bombard, because why not? Used to use the bombard a lot, and the bombard is still a very good implant. I mean, I actually maxed it out myself quite well. I can max that. I bought all the necessary like level up materials, and I'm playing around with the levels. It is high level, it is gold, but playing around with the levels, and I can basically max it out any day I feel like it. Now, when I said that the fighter performance is good, it is very good, especially with the bombard, where you can basically triple your DPS. Good for PvP, good for PvE. Although for PvE, I would prefer aerospace, just because it's a passive. It does give you a passive boost, and it's much cheaper to use. Doesn't use much fuel. Bombard eats fuel for breakfast, so yeah, you will have to refuel that quite often if you use it quite often. That's one thing I'm actually facing right now myself. I have to refuel the bombard, since I have been using it a lot. But with the fighters, you might notice a difference in damage application versus smaller targets. Now, don't get me wrong, it is still good DPS output, it's still very usable, and I'm not saying that fighters on the ship are bad. They're good. Both lightweight ships and fighters are good. It's just you have to watch out for when the fighters start to do little damage. That's when that's basically the moment where I would say you have to fit different type of fighters in the slots. And I know you have different fighters, and all of them have different stats now. So on this ship, maybe fighters that have like good damage application, they would be, I would say, the best. You can use the firebox if you want, but I feel like on this ship you definitely need fighters that have better damage application when it comes to smaller targets. Well, I mean, as you can see, it still pops them, it still does destroy them. I just feel like the lightweight ships did a better job when it comes to destroying these ships. Even though the total DPS is roughly the same, I would actually say I have a bit more DPS with fighters than with lighter ships. But it seems like the lightweight ships are able to apply that damage a little bit more than what fighters can do. And I have maxed out skills for lighter ships, and I have maxed out skills for fighters over here. And of course, it's a obvious difference, since fighters are technically using missiles, I think. Their damage is basically performing the same way, the calculation is being performed the same way missiles get calculated, while lightweight ships are using turrets and missiles. You have lightweight ships with missiles, and you have lightweight ships with turrets. On this ship, I've primarily used lightweight ships with turrets, The cavalry lightweight ships use missiles, for example, and for best DPS, Catalyst, Destroyers, and Thrashers have the best DPS output. It will be funny to see how this thing would perform if and when it actually can fit the frigate lightweight ships. I think that's going to be pretty interesting, since the frigate lightweight ships do have their own use. They can tackle, they can web, and that's important in combat, but I think this ship's role is pretty good already. Maybe they'll buff the Lucent-Moon down the road. I actually think that the ship might get a shield field module at one point, but I'm not really 100% sure that's going to happen. So that's one of the things been on my mind the whole video. But yeah, the Lucent-Moon. Surprised that I actually was able to get my hands on this ship that quickly. And it is definitely a very interesting ship to fly. So if you are into, if you're into flying weird ships, if you're into flying special ships like I am, then you will definitely enjoy this thing. It is a multi-purpose ship. I can see this thing making its way into some fleets, but at the same time, the moment this thing is spotted, that's the moment where it's going to get yeeted. Of course, its application usage is not only limited to fleet. You can use it solo, not something I would recommend, but you can use it for camps, for PvP, for things like that. It will work fairly well. And overall, that would be it for the Lucent-Moon for today. We'll have more videos up with the ships. I need to do a lot more tests, and it would be very fun to see how this thing compares to the CNC carrier when it comes to performance and clear speed. I think that's going to be quite fun to check out. But overall, tell me what you think about this ship. I'm very curious to see what you guys think about the Lucent-Moon. But with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. If you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe. And with that being said, stay safe, fly safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.